My name is Grace Rader,
Hi, I'm Bella Hunake.
and we are doing our study on employment outcomes for students with disabilities. This gives you a little overview of what our research proposal is. We decided not to do the slideshow because it was difficult to see with the video, so we'll just have the professor post our slideshow online. Along with the slideshow, we also have some handouts that we are bringing with us. Appendix A is the questionnaire that we were using, and Appendix B was the employment outcomes study consent and confidentiality form. So both of these will be posted by our professor.
So I will start. We instead of doing a research question, we will start our research with a hypothesis, and I'll read it to you. So our hypothesis is that students with disability who participate in school to work programs have better employment outcomes than students with disability who did not participate in school to work programs. So here our independent variable is school to work program participation, and our dependent variable is employment outcomes. So we kind of broke stuff down into like terms. So how are we defining student with disability? So we're defining student with disability as we're going to be looking at public schools, and then we're going to look at students who have individualized education plan. And so basically these are students with learning disabilities, and those who have been determined to have some kind of disability that could prevent them from learning like a normal student would. And then we're going to be, the term employment outcome is refers to as a score students receive on our questionnaires, which we'll go later, and then school to work program. So school to work program that is going to be preparing students to obtain employment after graduating from the program. So we're going to go to our next research design. So our research is exploratory. So we're going to be looking at the relationship between the two variables that we mentioned. And it's also quantitative, so we're looking at numbers, not just concepts. So those numbers are going to come from our data collection and then our samples that we're going to be looking at. So we review our literature, and basically most of the literatures that we review looked at, for example, Hernandez et al. 2008. Gold, Fabian, 2013, they all concluded that after their studies that students with disability who graduated from school to work program did in fact have better employment outcomes than the national statistics for adults with disabilities. So this, as you can see, kind of supported our hypothesis, but they weren't. They also look at groups that were not representative of each other. So continuing on to our sample. So we're going to look at two high schools. So we're going to look at similar demographics, so socioeconomic status, racial makeup, size, and location of our students. And then both of these students, like we haven't mentioned yet, but we're looking at students from Bloomingdale High School and Forest Northern High School. And both of these schools are located in suburbs of Michigan. And so the only difference is that one school have a school to work program and the other one does not. So continuing with our sample here, we're going to be looking at 4 graduating classes from each school. So we're going to look at class of 2017, we'll look at class of 2018, we'll look at class of 2019, and class of 2020. So in regards to sampling, we're going to be looking at a sample size of 400 students, so 200 from each schools. This would not be random sampling, as the goal is to get every student with an IAP from each school for the next 4 window that we're looking at. So you may be asking, how are we gonna contact the students? So we will have a consent and confidentiality form that will mail to their parents. This questionnaire, as Grace mentioned, it will be on this page. And so this questionnaire will be both open-ended and closed-ended questions, and we'll ask the parents to mail this back to us. because the students will be asked to fill out a questionnaire 1 year after graduation, we plan on sending this questionnaire to the parents, addressing and asking them to forward it to their student if in fact the students moved. So students will be selected by contacting each school. Because we already have the confidentiality in the consent form, we wouldn't have to worry about that. They will contact each school and ask them to forward us contact information. That will be phone number or email address for all of their students who have an IEP, and each graduating classes that we mentioned. So we'll go right into our data collection, and Grace will tell you guys about that.
Yep, I will go into data analysis to start. So data will be collected from the questionnaire that we're handing out. This information will be quantitative because we're kind of focusing more on numbers and we're not doing any interviewing. So using the demographic information that we're asking, those will be used to create different variables. And then these variables will be gender, race, school attended, and disability. After we get our different variables, we hand score all of these questionnaires, we'll put this information into Excel. So the way that we're scoring these questionnaires is that each answer will have a number value attached to it. So for example, one of the questions is, were you employed this year? The answer yes is worth 1 point. The answer no is worth 0 points. So what that tells us is that students who have a higher score at the end will have had better employment outcomes. All of the questions are scored in this way, so that answers that mean that they've had better employment outcomes are worth more of a number value. So the researchers, Bella and I, will score these, and then we'll put this information into Excel with all of the variables that we asked about at the beginning of the questionnaire. These variables will be inputted and will be run through SPSS, and then in the variable view we'll be able to see what factor these have had on the students' outcomes. Using this SPSS variable view, we'll determine the mean, the standard error, median mode, standard deviation, sample variance, kurtosis, skewness, range minimum, and maximum. By looking at all of these in relation to the variables, we'll be able to determine what other factors affected the employment outcomes, and we'll be able to see if it was just the participation in the school to work program that affected the employment outcomes. Now with this kind of study, validity and reliability are very important. So we're going to start and talk a little bit about validity. So content validity is when research, you want to make sure that the research is measuring what it's intended to measure. So to make sure that we are ensuring this, we have added other factors besides whether or not the students with disabilities have graduated from a school to work program or not. These factors include race, gender, disability, and school attended. For example, you wouldn't want to have all this data and say, wow, some of these students did a lot better in their employment outcomes, but not have the understanding of why they did better. So that's where the other variables come in. We're also going to be focusing on criterion validity, which deals with ensuring that research is indeed measuring what it is intended to measure, and that the measure is related to the outcome. So we want to make sure that if students do have better employment outcomes, that it is because of participating in a school to work program. So to do that, we kind of made sure that we had the right working definition of a school to work program and that we're measuring all of the correct things. So with construct validity, it's used to ensure that employment outcomes are really being measured. And so in order to make sure that we are measuring employment outcomes, we looked at what factors contributed to employment outcomes, and then we're able to include questions that focus on those areas into the questionnaire. And these are areas of income, satisfaction at job, hours worked, etc. Next, we're going to move on to pseudonyms and confidentiality. And so with the pseudonyms and confidentiality, all of the students will be assigned an ID number. So we're never actually using their name. Their names will not be published. Their names will not be used when we put their information into Excel, and there'll be no identifying information. Also, part of the consent form has a confidentiality piece, and it explains that we'll be locking all of the information that they give us, their information about their jobs, as well as their contact information. That'll be locked in a file cabinet that nobody will have access to except the researchers, and that's really important. We're also a little bit concerned about technical issues. So one technical issue would be if the parents or the students were to move, it would affect us being able to contact them. So enclosed will be a change of contact form that parents or students can fill out and send if need be. We'll also have their phone numbers and email addresses so that if we're having a hard time getting a hold of them, we can reach out to them and say, hey, you know, did you move? Are you willing to give us your updated contact information? The only other technical issue that we could think of would be if some students were not able to physically fill out the questionnaire and send it in to us. So we have an option on our consent form where they can write down their phone number and they can have us do the questionnaire, have it administered over the phone. So we're going to move into our ethical issues. So to make sure that all of this stayed ethical, first we created a consent form that included all of the things that APA, the American Psychological Association, suggests when you're working with human participants. This includes purpose of research, their right to decline, any foreseeable consequences, reasonable factors that may be expected to influence their willingness to participate in this kind of study, any research benefits, the limits of confidentiality, if there are any incentives for participation, and whom to contact for questions about the research. And this is the IRSB. This is kind of what they ask you to do, so we made sure that we followed that to a T. A couple other ethical issues that we discussed were students with disabilities are considered a protected population, and so you have to look at the way that you're going to work with that population and be really ethical. So what we're going to do is we're going to consult with experts, which in this case are going to be the special education teachers at the 2 schools that we're working with. So we'll be talking with them first and making sure that this won't cause harm to their students and making sure that they feel this is something that would be okay for their students to participate in. So in conclusion, this research we feel is very important to be funded and very important to be done. Because of previous studies, we know that school to work programs are very important for students with disabilities and that it does increase their employment outcomes. So if this study were to be funded, it could potentially create more funding for school to work programs and more awareness about how beneficial it can be for students with disabilities. On the last slide, you'll see all of our references and you'll be able to access this through, hopefully the professor is putting it up.
All right, well, thank you for following us.
Yeah.
If you have any additional questions regarding our specific study, just email us.
Yeah, send us an email.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.